So is pop music getting worse? Rick Beato and Anthony Fantano, yes, thank you for correcting my pronunciation in the comments. They disagree on this topic, but as I unpacked in my last video, neither of them really offers any standards for distinguishing good from bad music. And that's what I want to try to do in this video, at least to make a start on this. I want to offer some thoughts on a general framework that I think we can use to distinguish good from bad music. And I should stress that my thoughts on this are still very much under development. I want to try to share some ideas and then attempt to use them to start evaluating some music and musical trends over the next several videos. So it's going to be a bit like trying to build the airplane while flying it. And I welcome your thoughts, comments, and suggestions. I'm sure many of you will be super helpful in this process. And speaking of comments, many of you argued passionately in response to my last video that Rick is definitely right, that pop music is worse today and has been getting worse for a long time. Others sided with Fantano. Others made the point that I think we pretty much all agree with, that there's still lots of good music out there, but that you just have to dig harder to find it. And then there was this whole other contingent that expressed this profound skepticism about the idea of trying to reach any sort of objective evaluation of music. In essence, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and that musical preference is just 100% subjective. And I want to say at the outset that actually I think there's something right about each of these views, and that the real difficulty is in trying to reconcile them. But I do think, as paradoxical as that might sound, that it can be done, that we can reconcile objective evaluation of music with the pretty much inarguable fact that each of us is unique and that we all bring a specific context to music, and that really shapes what it is we like. So that's what I'm aiming at over the next several videos. I want to sort of flesh out this framework, and the long-term goal is to be able to say with a bit more clarity and objectivity than we currently can what makes some music really good and other music bad. So let's come back to this analogy between music and food. We often talk about musical taste, again, likening music to food. And it might be the case that we can develop our palate over time such that we, with repeated exposures, come to like some novel cuisine. But for the most part, we just like what we like. And if two people disagree about whether something tastes good, that's that, to each his own. But there's another dimension of food that we can and do more objectively evaluate, and that's nutrition, or how healthy something is. Regardless of any differences of opinion over whether something tastes good or bad, it's simply the case that certain foods are good for us and certain foods are less so. That certain foods in certain quantities at certain times of the day are likely to make us fat, lethargic, and despite any short-term pleasure, lead on the whole to us being less happy, not more so. Of course, healthy here is context dependent. What's healthy for a bodybuilder is not going to be healthy for me, and what's healthy for me is not going to be healthy for my 1-year-old son. Nonetheless, though, for any given individual in any given situation, some things are definitely healthier than others. And if we zoom out enough at a certain level, we see that some things are just universally true for all of us. We all need some amount of protein, and we'd all be better off with no amount of cyanide. I think you can see where I'm going with this. I think we can say something similar about music, that some music is healthier than other music. And perhaps just like with the things we eat, the devil is in the dosage. A sweet, sugary treat in the right amount at the right time is not only harmless, but it actually serves the broader goal for which we care about nutrition to begin with. That is, achieving our own long-term happiness. But if there's something to be said for this analogy, if this analogy holds any weight, then I think it can raise our level of awareness about what we're actually consuming, musically speaking. The point of thinking about this stuff is not to enable us to go around moralizing about other people's musical decisions, or to sit around bemoaning the Billboard Hot 100. The purpose is to enable us to make better decisions for ourselves in our own lives, given our own contexts. And if there are any broader social issues that relate to music, the only way to solve them in the end is for each of us as individuals to make better decisions for ourselves. Now, I know some of you are probably rolling your eyes about this whole health food analogy, and maybe you'll convince me I'm wrong. I mean, Food, after all, is something physical that we ingest, that releases nutrients, that sustains our lives, whereas music is just auditory cheesecake, as Steven Pinker put it. Or is it? What if I were to convince you that actually music is one of the most powerful drugs known to man? It certainly can be an incredibly potent force. Music can make us laugh, it can make us cry, it can unlock long-forgotten memories, it can activate the same reward circuits in the brain as drugs, sex, and candy, and also the same stress circuits in our brain that release cortisol. According to Daniel Levitin, a neuroscientist who studies music in the brain, music affects pretty much every area of the brain so far studied. After Congresswoman Gabby Giffords sustained a gunshot wound to the head, she had to relearn how to speak, and she did that using music therapy, because music can actually help us rewire the brain. It can also enhance the size of certain brain structures, most notably the corpus callosum, that bundle of nerves that connects the left and right hemispheres. Children who play musical instruments have bigger corpus callosa than those who don't. And they also score higher on tests of critical thinking. Plus, anyone who's ever done karaoke knows that singing, especially in groups, can help release feelings of depression and loneliness. It actually releases oxytocin and enhances social bonding. Many of us wake up to music in the morning, we work out to it, we work to it, we commute to it. It's a near constant part of our lives. We use it to buoy our mood and energy during the day and to help us fall asleep at night. It can be one of the most life-enhancing drugs out there, and let's be honest, we're all hooked on it. But for all of music's power, most of us have no idea how or why it works. It's the closest thing that we rational 21st century people have to alchemy. Like wine, though, we can enjoy it without really knowing anything about it. But like wine and really anything else, knowledge is power. The more we know, the better we can understand how it works, why it works, how powerful it is, and how to use it well. Now, truly understanding how music works at a deep level requires knowledge not only of music, but also of physiology, neuroscience, and probably several other fields. All of these require a lifetime of study to be an expert in, and I'm not, let me stress, not an expert in any of these. I'm just a musician who spent most of his life playing and recording music. I started playing guitar when I was about 9, and I was always fascinated by this intersection between science and sound. That led me to go to school for audio engineering. I wound up working in the music industry in Nashville, and my hope is that over the years I've picked up enough to serve as a useful guide to some of the really fascinating research that the scientists are doing. So in this and other episodes, I'll rely on the work of David Huron, Elizabeth Helmuth-Margulis, Daniel Levitin, Nolan Gasser, and others. And I recommend, if you really want to learn this stuff inside and out, go read their books. They're incredible. To grasp how music might impact our lives for better or worse, we first have to know a little bit about what music even is and how it works. Consider what happens in our heads when we hear music. It can actually cause synchronous neural firing in the brain, meaning that it causes certain neurons to fire at the same time and at the same rate. So a poetic way of putting this, as Elizabeth Margulis does, is that music actually plays the brain. You've probably heard the phrase, neurons that fire together wire together. And this is really important for understanding music's effect on us and its ability to shape and improve our lives. Dr. Lee Bartell has done a lot of work in this field, and according to him, brain regions that don't work at the same brainwave frequencies don't talk to one another. And when brain regions don't talk to one another, really bad things can happen. So for instance, if two brain regions that are involved in motor coordination stop talking to one another, we can actually develop dyskinesia, or these uncontrolled, uncoordinated movements, as happens to people with Parkinson's. Or two brain regions that are associated with memory stop talking to one another, well, people become forgetful. They develop amnesia, Alzheimer's, dementia, all sorts of bad things can happen. So music can actually help to jumpstart the conversation between brain regions and thereby reverse the effects of some of these diseases, which is just incredible. It blows my mind. I mean, we just put it on for enjoyment, but it actually functions as medicine. All of this requires sound that meets certain parameters. And I want to show you something that lacks all of these parameters, and so makes a really good foil for better understanding what music is. This is a mathematically devised sequence of tones used in submarine echolocation. And the trick with echolocation is distinguishing between sounds that are being transmitted and those being received. And the way that mathematicians solved this problem was to come up with a tone that lacks repetition in every single parameter. So this is Scott Rickard talking about what he's calling the world's ugliest piece of music.
The point when you hear this music is not that it's supposed to be beautiful. This is supposed to be the world's ugliest piece of music. In fact, it's music that only a mathematician could write. So when you're listening to this piece of music, I implore you, try and find some repetition. Try and find something that you enjoy, and then revel in the fact that you won't find it, okay? So without further ado, Michael Linville, the director of chamber music at the New World Symphony, will perform the world premiere of The Perfect Ping.
What this highlights is the fact that repetition is key to our understanding and enjoyment of something as music. So noise without any sort of repetition is not music. And this also puts us in a better position to understand how it is that music conveys meaning. Why do we have this incredibly complex auditory processor on top of our shoulders? Well, like every other organ and biological system, it's there to keep us alive. It's there to alert us to sonic patterns in our environment, so that if we hear a tiger crouching behind us in the grass or a boulder rolling down the hill in front of us, we can detect that action in our environment and respond accordingly. Detecting action in the environment around us is an incredibly important biological function. And music, in effect, takes advantage of the same biological processes that enable us to detect action in our environments. According to Professor David Berry at Converse University, music conveys action itself. It conveys action without the actor. Now, we know that there can never be action without an actor, but what music does is it leverages these biological processes to give us, in effect, a stylized representation of action. If this is true, it would help to explain the universal connection between music and dance. We hear action and we want to complement it or act it out with our bodies. And it would also help to explain what happens when we hear music and close our eyes and let ourselves be carried along with the sound. Our minds suggest to us something like Disney's Fantasia. It suggests to us entities that perhaps could take the actions that we're hearing stylized representations of. We also do stuff like this in non-musical contexts all the time. Supposing you're sitting at your desk in an apartment building and you hear a door slam and someone walking down the hall. And suppose you hear a voice and it's relatively high-pitched, and maybe when you hear the walking, it sounds like high heels. So from all of this, all you're getting is this audible representation of action, but you're able to discern all these things about the thing acting from hearing only that representation, only that audible representation of the thing that's acting. Given the slamming door, you can tell something about the psychological state of the person. Given the pitch range of the voice and the sound of the high heels, you can tell that it's probably female. And from the sound of the door, you might even be able to tell like roughly what material it's made out of. From here, it's not too hard to see how composers and musicians could leverage these facts to create stylized representations of action. So for instance, to convey the scene that I just discussed, they could use a kick drum to convey the slamming door, a snare drum to convey the sound of the heels, and maybe a wailing violin or clarinet to convey the sound of the woman's voice. But of course, musicians are not confined to conveying such literal representations of actions. Over the centuries, they have devised all sorts of musical mechanisms for creating more and more stylized representations of actions. For instance, conveying an entire 20-minute summer storm in a few minutes, as in Beethoven's Pastoral Symphony. And they've devised mechanisms not just for conveying physical actions, but also psychological actions like emotions and moods. Emotions are lightning-like evaluations of a given experience. And using melody, rhythm, and harmony, musicians have figured out how to convey these psychological actions. And if, as Barry holds, music conveys action, then it also helps to explain how people could hear the same sonic qualities and yet come to vastly different evaluations. People see the same actions all the time, but depending on their values, come to vastly different conclusions about those actions. If you're rooting for a team in the Olympics and you see them score a goal, your evaluation in response to that will be vastly different than it would have been had you happened to be rooting for the opposing team. So people can see the same actions and come to different emotional responses. And likewise, people can hear the same sonic representations of actions and have vastly different emotional responses. The rough equivalent of your team affiliation is what I've been calling sense of life, or what cognitive behavioral therapists call core beliefs. Core beliefs are these deeply held ideas about how the world works and what your role is in the world. We all know people who are incredibly sour. It doesn't matter how good things are in their lives. If anything goes wrong, they treat that as the norm. We also know people that are just absolutely bomb-proof. They might have fluctuations in their moods here and there, but on the whole, they roll with the punches and generally just tend to think that life is great. If you think that life is this Shakespearean tragedy where we're all doomed to pursue these dreams that we can never actually achieve, then you're going to have a much greater affinity to music that expresses that view. Whereas on the other hand, if you think that life is great and that your dreams are yours to achieve, you'll have a much greater affinity to music that expresses that view, and so on and so forth for every shade and variety in between. So what does this mean for judging then any given piece of music as good or bad? Well, I think that the questions for whether or not I should listen to something or shouldn't are really the same questions that we need to ask ourselves with regard to any other action that we could take. Will listening to this piece of music make my life better, or will it predispose me to thoughts and actions that are actually bad for my life? Look, I'm not suggesting that if Baby Got Back comes on the radio and you start singing along, that you are or will become a misogynist or a skank. And I'm not saying that if you happen to like Last Resort by Papa Roach, you're probably going to commit suicide. The first studies that I know of that tried to link behavior to listening habits came out after Tipper Gore's campaign in Congress to try to get parental advisory stickers on albums. And they painted this grim picture. But in the decades since, scientists have failed again and again to replicate those results. And at this point, those studies have essentially been debunked. In any case, statistics don't override our free will. Regardless of any statistical link between listening habits and behavior, that doesn't change the fact that we each have the ability to think and choose how we want to respond to any given piece of music or the emotions it gives rise to. Along with that, we each have the responsibility to think for ourselves about whether it's good or bad for our lives to listen to a given song or album or genre of music. It's a choice that each of us has to make on our own, and each of us is alone in the driver's seat. But while we're making these kinds of decisions, we shouldn't forget that the music we listen to can have tremendous psychological and physiological impacts on us. According to Audio-Technica, we spend 12 to 13 years of our lives listening to music. And if the psychologist's observation holds that your environment has a tremendous impact on how you think and how you act, then we ought to be really careful and thoughtful about how we choose our musical friends, the artists that we go to for inspiration and motivation. We want friends that tell us, yes, you can, and here's how. Not friends that tell us, no, you can't, and here's why. Consider that from 3rd to 8th grade, I listened to almost nothing except Metallica. I could listen to 5 Metallica albums back to back and not think twice about it. That was just my thing. And on the school bus in the morning on the way to school, I'd be listening to aggressive guitars and pounding drums and lyrics about nightmares and war. And when I got to school, what do you think happened? If I did poorly on a test or if I did something embarrassing, do you think I saw things on the bright side? What happens when you prime the pump with negatives is that you're going to see more of them. And this is precisely what happened with me. Consider just how much music can change your view of the world. I want to do a quick experiment. Watch this video and think about what's happening, what's going on, and how you feel about it. Okay, now we're going to watch the same video with a different soundtrack, and I want you to keep the same questions in mind. What's going on, and how do you feel about it? You get the point, right? I mean, music can radically alter how we view the world. For me, with the first video, with the serene music, I almost didn't at all notice the gazelles in the background. With the second soundtrack, they came into sharp focus, and I was acutely aware of the danger of the situation for them. All right, so you get the idea. Music can vastly alter our view of the world, and this is precisely what was happening to me as I sat there listening to Metallica every morning on the school bus. But before we go moralizing about music, we have to keep in mind that the reverse relationship is also true. That what we're viewing when we hear a piece of music can also alter the meaning of that piece of music for us. So I want to try another experiment. This time we're going to hear the same soundtrack, but with a different video. And same questions. What's going on, and how do you feel about it? So did the emotional meaning of this music change for you between the beginning and the end of the clip? Maybe you kind of smirked at the surprising contrast between the really serious music and the toy soldiers and tanks. But then you saw the map of Ukraine, and again, you sort of realized what was going on, and that music once again changed. Same music, different meaning. What's going on here? Well, again, this just underlines the fact that whatever we're viewing, our context, whatever we're experiencing in our lives, can change the meaning of a piece of music for us. Take another example. Years ago, my wife and I had gone to Colorado to go skiing and snowboarding with some friends. And we got to the Eagle Vale Airport, this tiny little airport, and we were going to get our rental car and take off on this great adventure, except it seemed like everybody else was there and they all were in front of us in the rental car line. And it took forever. It must have taken an hour or two to get our rental car. And when we finally got it, the first song we played was a song that, honestly, in any other context, we just wouldn't listen to. It's not really a song that I care for or like that much. But its meaning completely changed because of the context. And that was Freedom 90 by George Michael. And it was just kind of this hilarious ode to freedom. Like, we finally got our car and we're off on this adventure. And that song, to this day, has this specific meaning for us because of this context. So the point is that music can change our view of the world, and our view of the world, including what we happen to be viewing when we hear a piece of music, can change our view of that music. The relationship goes both ways. And the people who get paid to choose music for commercials and movies are experts at leveraging these kinds of relationships. Even if a song has a definite meaning, that meaning can be modulated for better or worse by the new context. The context can change and infuse that song with some new meaning. So whether it's good or bad for someone to listen to a given piece of music in a specific context, is at least as difficult to determine as whether or not it's good for them to eat a cheeseburger or a fruit salad or a piece of chocolate cake. It's complex, it's contextual, it depends on what people are listening to that music for, what they associate with it, and how it will affect them long term. Ultimately, it's an answerable question. It's not a question that has no answer. It's not completely subjective. It does have a definite answer of whether it's good or bad for this person. It might be really, really difficult for us to figure out whether or not it's good or bad for us to listen to a given piece of music in any given context. And we might only be able to do it for ourselves in our own contexts. But we can do at least that, listening responsibly and just being aware to the ways in which music can slant our minds in one direction or another. And to some extent, we might be able to use this framework to call out why some music is likelier to positively or negatively impact more people, while keeping in mind at the same time how uniquely individual we all are. So that's my plan. I want to start using this framework and these ideas to look at specific genres of music, the ideas typically conveyed in those genres, and how those have changed over time. Maybe you think this is a terrible idea, or maybe you have some knockdown criticism of this whole approach. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, this is Noteworthy. I'm John Hersey, and if you want to show me you care, like, subscribe, and share. Thanks for watching.